Hello everyone, I'm Wave, and today I thought I would talk about the quote-unquote continual stale visual novel releases from any set of dedicated companies. So let's get into it. Now, I've mentioned on the channel before that maybe something like key games feel a little bit too similar to one another after you played enough of them, but I think also a better example is something that I saw from back when I remember when Cafe Stella first released on Steam. There was like a pretty solid amount of mixed reviews on the game where people weren't really vibing with the game at launch and were saying it feels a little too similar to everything else that I've already played from Yuzusoft. So I can't really say that Cafe Stella is all that great. Now, if you look at the Steam reviews for Cafe Stella as of current, it's gone back up to where it is quite positive. But now that the latest localized release of the Yuzusoft title is out, I'm pretty sure it's called Angelic Chaos Reboot. You can't really look because it's not on Steam, but I've kind of heard similar kind of takes as of late where, Angelic Chaos is not too great. People either are enjoying it or they aren't. And it could just be the early adopters, right? Voicing their opinion saying, I didn't really like it. But I think when you look at a lot of the previous localized releases of Yuzusoft titles, you start to see a pattern too as well. To where I think Yuzusoft as a visual novel developer is somebody that's actually quite stable, and that they are pumping out regular releases, and you can see that within a lot of the releases there is this sort of pattern, or where each dedicated visual novel that they have been releasing as of late has this sort of like gimmick to where a lot of the characters feel quite similar, not only in their like designs, but also the way that the story progresses, and how you could say that each and every single release has 4 different heroines, and maybe some of the heroines across different titles all kind of share the same level of tropes. And to just really top it off, it does kind of go in with that level of gimmick where each and every single release starts to feel same-ish, and the only difference is, or like the main difference between each release is that quote-unquote gimmick. Or you could say, oh, Senran Banka is the Yuzusoft title that has this very like rural Japan vibe, where Riddle Joker is the Yuzusoft visual novel that has a superhero vibe. Sabbath of the Witch is the Yuzusoft title that has the like magical girl / witch vibe. And continuous on and on and on, to where many of those releases do feel quite samey. And for me personally, the way I kind of circumvent that is the fact that I finished a Yuzusoft title, I'm going to go ahead and wait until I read the next one, right? Because if I was to dive from one to the other back to back, or I'm going to be like more harshly affected, and I'm going to feel that similarity a little too much. And I don't really necessarily think there is it's like a bad thing to have that level of similarity, because if you're somebody that knows that you've already enjoyed other Yuzusoft titles, for this instance, when you're ready to experience that same level of vibe, you know what you're going to be getting into. That said, I can see also the other side where people get annoyed and want to see something different. I'm somebody that played Netsuzora Kanata, which is an untranslated Yuzusoft game from many, many years back, and that is the only title from Yuzusoft in this example of a company that has made quote-unquote stale visual novel releases, to where they did something quite different, where it still has the same kind of rom-com-y vibes as anything that you would expect from Yuzusoft, but at the same time also has more like serious tones because of the fact that the genre is different. It's Nakage. There is a very different setting as well. There isn't any school that the player character has to go to. It's set within an island, and it's set during the summer, and the way that things progress is vastly different from anything else that you probably would have read from Yuzusoft. And I genuinely do like it. I wish they could do more of that, but at the same time, you look at their success of all of their modern games, and you have to see that, they're going to keep pumping out what they know works. And like I said, it's not necessarily only to Yuzusoft. I say with key games, same thing, right? I've been waiting on reading Rewrite for quite some time now after finishing Air, probably maybe over a year ago, if not a little longer. And just because, I feel like a lot of the key games hit on the same topics, and while Rewrite might not necessarily have the same sort of theming compared to some of the other titles, just as how I would say Little Busters is also a little bit of an outlier when it comes to stereotypical key games and what could be considered a like stale visual novel lineup of just pumping out games that are too close to one another. I have just been waiting to be able to read Rewrite because I have a certain expectation and think that, you know, when I'm ready for something that is within that same kind of style, I will go ahead and jump back in. But yeah, I've seen some people talk about it, specifically in that instance of Cafe Stella for Ubisoft. And I think over time, people do start to change their opinions, because if you are just jumping from game to game, it is going to feel quite similar. And in a way, I'm surprised that, you know, considering that the latest Ubisoft release got delayed on Steam, took like an extra year, and then finally got released outside of Steam, that in that extra time, opinions still haven't really changed. I think I had thought that, considering how long it had been since the last release, people would have been a little bit more chill when it came to it. And I have been seeing the same kind of instance of people saying that Angelic Chaos Reboot is kind of mid. And I do think in some ways that sort of similar style to storytelling and general progression of story, and also just like character design, right? How many characters in the last few Ubisoft games where it's like the main heroine has white hair? I do think in some situations, you know, people look at one newer release, think it's very much like almost a carbon copy of what they've already previously played, and think, okay, well, why am I gonna bother? But yeah, this is just a brief little topic that I thought would be fun to discuss, because in a way it does kind of have that sort of like stale, or like, I don't know, maybe like Call of Duty syndrome kind of thing, where it's just like, oh, every year they're pumping out another visual novel that's like almost, you know, like it is just like exactly the same as the previous version. And while I think that's actually very like wrong to say, because obviously it's a whole other game, there isn't a whole lot of like reusing of assets, I would say, but at the same time I can see where, if the storytelling, if the characters, if the general like progression, and where like everything is decided upon just, oh, it's a Ubisoft title, but the gimmick this time is this rather than that, I can get where people can say, you know, it is quote unquote stale. But yeah, those have been my brief thoughts on quote-unquote stale visual novel releases. I've been Wave. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you next time.